Hello everyone, and welcome to the second book review of Olden Word books. So today we're going to be talking about the Worm Ouroboros, written in 1922 by Eddison. I actually read this in physical or paperback. I read The King of Witchland's Daughter in Kindle. I've since gone back to physical books. I'd like to start off with this quote by J.R.R. Tolkien at the bottom there. The greatest and most convincing writer of invented worlds that I have read. I don't think that's an understatement. There are a lot of flaws to this book, and I will go through those flaws. But this book is it's a crowning achievement of fantasy, and you'll probably notice most of the books that I'm going to talk about throughout this series are actually going to be some of my favourites of all time. And I actually only read this book this year. I found it so enjoyable though, mainly because of the language, and we'll get into the language, that I can probably consider it one of my favourite works of fantasies of all time, or fantasy of all time. If I wanted to describe this book in one sentence, I'd probably say it's the opposite of King of Witchland's Daughter in many respects. It's a story about political intrigue, courtly drama, war, faction wars, nobility. It's very much based on E.R. Edison's work in the Norse sagas, and I believe he translated some of the Norse sagas. It's got a little bit of medievalism in there as well. It's very much about men and nobility and the strife and heroic deeds, and it almost feels like a more it feels like the Iliad written in the 1600s or the 1500s. Yeah, the 1500s. And that's one thing that I will say straight away. This book is actually written in almost a King James Bible style, and I will give you some excerpts later on. The book is even, when letters are read out, for example, the writing goes even more archaic. So we've got like added e's to certain words. We've got different variations of words, like majesty might be spelled completely different, but you will read it and you will understand it. It's not particularly difficult once you get your head around it, I suppose. I should say that the background to this video, which you should be seeing, those characters there are, I believe, illustrated by Keith Henderson. Henderson, I should say. He was one of the first illustrators for the book. I believe those illustrations there that you're seeing were done for the first edition. Those are the Lords of Demonland. Now, one of the things about the names in this book are that they're not particularly cohesive. I believe they were sort of childish, or not in a disparaging way, a childish or juvenile conception of E.R. Edison. So we have names like Demonland, Pixieland, Witchland, Goblinland. There's some charm to it. There's definitely some charm to it, but it doesn't have the same technical mastery that Tolkien had when it comes to his conception of names. We have names like Goldry Bluzco and Spitfire even. I mean, we have names like Juss and Grow and Gorice the 12th. They're very odd names that don't seem to really have any rhyme or reason to them, but they stick with you. Grow, for example, is one of my favourite characters, and we'll get to Grow later on. One of the things that most people say about this book is that it starts off very, very poorly, and I tend to agree with that. As you probably noticed from the first review that I did for King of Witchland's Daughter, I do favour books that dwell on people going into the other world, and people crossing a boundary and going to a fantasy realm. This book does something similar, and most old fantasy books do that because I believe it was a way to ease people in to fantasy that weren't particularly well. It just wasn't a thing back then, I suppose. So they had to ease them in. And the story begins with a character called Lessingham. This man, we don't know much about him. He's whisked away, and this is not a spoiler, it's the very start of the book. and it becomes quite quickly apparent that it does not matter in the slightest. This character called Lessingham is whisked away on a winged horse, like a sort of Pegasus-like horse, to the planet of Mercury, and he visits the planet Mercury, which is very much Earth-like, to sort of see the happenings and goings on in Demonland, which the book starts with Demonland, and the 4 characters there: Goldry Bluzzcold, Just, Spitfire, and Lord Brandok Daha. I forgot to mention Brandok Daha. Not sure if I'm pronouncing that correctly. And so Lessingham disappears very quickly, without any sort of trace, without any rhyme or reason. He just goes. I think Eddison, I'm not sure if he actually lost interest in writing about the frame story and the character that begins the Worm Ouroboros. I almost quite like it because he almost just dissolves and the story just happens, because he's watching the courtly drama in Demonland, and it just fades out, and we're just with Demonland for the rest of the story, and well, with other factions as well, but it starts with Demonland. And so the frame story for most people is the weakest part. I will say that the book does have, I should make use of holding the book. I never got to do that. I never had the chance to do it with King Wefland's Daughter. It's actually a really nice edition. See that there? Really nice illustrations. Where was I? So the book feels to me, we'll go for the pros and cons, and these are the cons. I'd like to dwell on the cons for a little bit. The book feels to me much too external in terms of its prose and sort of the frame of each character's mind. We don't actually get inside the characters and their thoughts. It's very much I believe there was a quote that said the Worm Ouroboros is very much external, and it deals with its pure event. It's a novel of pure event. I think that's it's an apt description of the book. It's very much a book that has a sort of confident nobility to it. It doesn't dwell particularly on introspection, or it does dwell on emotion. It's got some beautiful scenes, but it's a very hard book to me. It feels like a Norse saga or a medieval sort of chronicle. But there's definitely little in terms of the characters' thoughts and feelings. There's a sense of aloofness, and maybe a bit of a hardness as well, which isn't necessarily a bad thing considering what the book is about, and actually it's sort of the driving ethos for the Lords of Demonland, this warrior people. One of the things about the book that I least enjoyed is there's a sense of distinctness between the reader and what's going on. So I think that, and the language is also quite a barrier to that as well, especially if you haven't read things like the Silmarillion. But there are characters like the Red Foliot, for example. Foliot was new to me, Foliot, who just appears, and I don't think that a Foliot, for example, is a red creature, it's a red-skinned creature. I don't think many people would understand what that actually is, and I certainly didn't. I had to Google that. Who just appears, and there's only one Red Foliot, the Red Foliot, and it's one of these books where it doesn't necessarily explain all of its characters and events and the imagery that you see sometimes. It's a bit odd in certain times. It certainly feels eccentric. That was one of the quotes at the back of the book, actually. It feels eccentric. Although that can be its charm, that can be a charm as well. And in terms of the description as well, it's a very ornate book. There's almost a profusion of imagery. There's so much colour, and every character is described from head to toe, and that's actually not a good thing to do. When you want a reader to think of a character and make a conception, I believe, in my personal opinion, the writer should probably just pick out a few points and let the reader form a sort of essence of the character in their mind. But this book goes the opposite way, We've got the headdresses, we've got the eye colour, we've got the garment colour, we've got the way their swords look. There's a lot of gems in the book. There's a lot of paintings and decoration, fabrics, textiles, just a lot of different elements that are almost overwhelming. So I'd probably take it back and probably would say it's off-putting in certain respects. Although some of the imagery is incredible. I think that you could have definitely toned down the imagery there. But in terms of the prose, it's one of my favourite parts of the book by far. I am very much a reader who likes old, archaic language, the Silmarillion, King Gorice of Witchland to some extent. The Wood Beyond the World, I didn't particularly like that book, but The Wood Beyond the World had a incredible language as well. And so as I say, it's written in 16th century English, and so it's these and thous and ye and verily. But this book takes it quite a bit further than that, because as characters read letters, for example, the writing itself in the text will be modified to sort of emulate a genuine letter from the 1500s, 1600s. So it'll be things like added e's at the end of words, just different modified words to give it a sense of authenticity. And actually, in regards to authenticity, most people say that this book is one of the best in terms of emulating old archaic speech. Most people sort of groan when they think of these and those and cheesy, sort of corny fantasy written by people that don't necessarily know how to pull that style off correctly and have the technical expertise to write in that particular way. One of the things that I like about the book, especially, is the sense of sort of political intrigue and camaraderie. We have got a lot of different factions. It could be very easy to get lost in all the different names and different factions, and there's about 6 of them, I believe, 6 main ones. But there's definitely a sense of camaraderie to the characters and how they act with one another. It's not. It almost feels positive in a way. It doesn't. It's about war and death and destruction. But as if you do read the book, you'll see that there's a sense of joy in war, and it is very much a book that is the antithesis of what Tolkien would have wanted about his the deeds of the common man and the common good and the little people. This is very much a book about aristocratic war and the heroic deed and the virtue of fighting for what you believe. It's a very sort of manly book in the traditional sort of sense, so like a Homeric Iliad sort of sense. But throughout all these different characters, there's a sense of, because the book dwells in all these different places like Pixieland and Goblinland and Demonland, and we visit these places multiple times, you get a sense of, oh, I know this place, and I know what, for example, the Lord Corrund is doing, and how what his actions have led to this and that, and it feels like it's like an interconnected weave of different political events that I really enjoyed. I thought at first it might be a little bit dry, but really it's not. There's a sense of charm to it. I think he definitely pulls off the sort of the feeling of the faction war and the drive behind what everyone's doing, and the world feels alive. And it's very interesting for 1922. It's you can find maps out there, for example, of the world of Mercury, and the places do come to feel quite familiar and quite enjoyable in the way that they're explored and all the battles that happen. And so, before I read the excerpts, I will read the back of the book, just to give a little flavour before I read the text, to give you an idea of how the book actually sounds and feels as a world, as a distinct world. This is the book that shaped the landscape of contemporary science fiction and fantasy. When The Lord of the Rings first appeared, the critics inevitably compared it to this 1922 landmark work. Tolkien himself frankly acknowledged its influence, with warm praise for its imaginative appeal. The story of a remote planet's great war between two kingdoms, those kingdoms being Demonland and Witchland, the two primary kingdoms, it ranks as the Iliad of heroic fantasy. Tall words, tall praise. In the best traditions of Homeric epics, Norse sagas and Arthurian myths, E.R. Eddison weaves a compelling adventure with a majestic Shakespearean narrative style. His sweeping tale recounts battles between warriors and witches on fog-shrouded mountaintops and in the ocean's depths, along with romantic interludes, backroom intrigues and episodes of direst treachery. I think that really does sum it up, actually. All the key words are there that I would wish to say, I think. And so, again, sit back and relax, and please enjoy these quick excerpts. Now again, I'm not going to particularly give any context for these, just purely to, I read these purely to give a sense of the world and to see if you might like the book. Yet am I a philosopher, answered Lord Grow, and somewhat know I of alchemy and the hidden properties of this material world, the virtues of herbs, plants, stones, and minerals, the ways of the stars and their courses, and the influences of those heavenly bodies. And I have held converse with birds and fishes in their degree, and that generation which creepeth on the earth is not held in scorn by me, but oft talk I in sweet companionship with the eft of the pond, and the glowworm, and the ladybird, and the pismire, and their kind, making them my little gossips. That's an excerpt from one of my favourite characters, Lord Grow, the grave scholar, the advisor to Gorice XII, a very evocative character. One of the best characters actually in the book, and many people agree, I believe, that Lord Grow, very well written. He is not one-dimensional at all. He switches sides constantly. He constantly questions himself. And a book that is definitely has a sense of distance between the characters. He is a standout. Mervian leaned forward in an embrasure, one hand on either battlement at her left and right. I would know their names, said she. Thou that hast oft fared to the wars mayst teach me. Grow, I know, with a long beard, and heart-heaviness it is to see a lord of Goblinland in such a fellowship. What's he beside him? Yon bearded gallant with a winged helm and a diadem about it, like a king's, and beareth a glaive crimson-hafted? He looketh a proud one. Again, the language is utterly incredible. I'm almost of the opinion that archaic speech is objectively better than normal writing, common writing, modern writing. Of course, not always. I don't think anyone's going to disagree that Nabokov is a worse prose stylist than E.R. Eddison. I don't think so. But there's a certain majesty to the words here. He took him by the hand. O Laxus, saith he, I give thee not thy head only, but thy sword. And here he gave it him held foremost. For thy dealings with us in the battle of Cartadza, let time that hath an art to make dust of all things so do with the memory of these. Since then, thou hast shown thyself still our noble enemy, and so shall we account thee still. And there at the end is the notion of the book, the core of the book, the idea that the enemy can be noble, the sense of virtuous battle. Mark him that weareth it, his sweet dark countenance, the violet fire in his eyes, the sombre warmth of his smile, like autumn woods in late sunshine. This is Lord Juss, lord of this age-remembering castle, than whom none hath more worship in wide Demonland. Somewhat he knoweth of art magical, yet useth not that art, for it suppeth the life and strength, nor is it held worthy that a demon should put trust in that art, but rather in his own might and main. I read this book this year, a couple of months ago, and it's passages like that that really solidify that it's one of my favourite fantasies of all time, one of my favourite books of all time. Despite all its pros and cons, and it's actually I believe it has, for me, more cons than pros. The pros that it does have vastly overwhelm and negate the cons, for me anyway. The Worm Ouroboros, if you like fantasy and you want to again see where fantasy came from, and you want a more epic and challenging read, it certainly has moments of challenge. It's an ornate book. It feels, it's almost like I've not read the Fairy Queen, but it's possibly like that. If the Fairy Queen was actually written in the same era as this book tries to emulate, it's highly worth your time if you want an almost cross between the Silmarillion and the Iliad, written in sort of eccentric Shakespearean style. So that was The Worm Ouroboros by E.R. Eddison. Again, hope you enjoyed the second video. We'll try to improve the quality of these videos over time, and hope you enjoyed that longer and more in-depth review of the second book in the series. So thanks for watching, hail, and until next time.